Okay, so here's part 2 of talking about the Mazzaroth. So, as we were just saying, these are the Latin names that people are familiar with. Just in case you can't read it, I'll go through the list. Now, the reason that Francis Rolleston, has it in this order, just so you know, is that this is the constellation in the spring. Now, the thing is, the constellations, there's a thing called the progression of the equinoxes, which is almost a 26,000-year revolution. So you could say, if you look at a clock face, you've got the hour hand, the minute hand, and the second hand. Well, so we have a day, 24 hours as we call it. Then we have a week, a month, a year. According to the Bible, there's something called a Shemitah, which is a 7-year, and a Jovel, or a Jubilee, which is a 50-year. And then Rolleston talks about something in this Hebraic ancient thinking of a 600-year sequence. We think of a millennium as a 1,000-year, but then there's this 26,000, not quite that number, it's close, 26,000-year progression of the equinox. So built into the heavens is a clock face showing 26,000 years. But people who study the Bible, if you look at the genealogical record of the fathers and sons and their names and how long each one was separated, it looks like there's only been 6,000 years of life on Earth. Of course, scientists will tell us there's 60 million or other, but that's a different type of calculation. But what I'm saying, according to the genealogical record in the Bible, there's only 6,000 years of record. And if you say that the Creator Elohim gave us the model of a 7-day week to tell a story, to give us a projected package deal, why did he make the week be 7 days long? So some people say, because Peter said, unto Elohim, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years like a day. I know one guy said that means to the moment, the second, there's going to be 7,000 years, period. And at 6,000 years, at that moment, boom, like the striking of a clock, then there's the 7th millennium. Well, the model is 6,000 days of work, or 6,000 years, and then one day, 1,000 years of Shabbat, of rest. It's kind of like the 7 sevens, the 49 years of the Jubilee, and the 50th year is the party year, that type of a thing. Is that true? It's all speculation. It's a model, but is it true? But why then would he give us a clock, a face in the heavens of 26,000 years? What does that mean? That's how long it takes for this series of these 12 constellations to work their way around the belt of the zodiac and come back to where they started. Just so you know, just for the sake of information. Now, in the springtime, if Aries the ram is, you might say, let's say, if you're looking at the international dateline, you could say, what time is it? Greenland mean time here, or in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, or in the middle of Jerusalem. There's different standards people have. You got to pick a point to start. Okay, let's start at the spring equinox. Which constellation is on the horizon in the breaking of the morning sun on the day of the spring equinox? If at one point in time it's going to be one of these constellations, about 2,500 years later, it'll be the next constellation. And then the next one. So if you take 2,500 times 12, that's where you get the 26,000, or plus or minus a few numbers. That's where you get that. Each one of these constellations is the constellation at the horizon, at the spring equinox, for about 2,500 years. And then the next one is, because it's slowly moving. Like I said, it's a really slow moving 26,000 year face of the clock, like the hour hand, only it's really slow. Okay, so why would he do that? We're not going to answer that question. Nobody knows, but I'm just telling you what it looks like. Okay, so if Aries the ram is the constellation that was at the equinox 2,500 years ago in the days of Daniel, nowadays it's going to be Pisces. Or if it used to be Pisces, nowadays it would be Aquarius. So remember that song back in the 60s, this is the dawning of the age of Aquarius? That's because this constellation was the one that was coming into being. Well, let's say that's now. Let's just say now, if this is the beginning of the age of Aquarius, that means 2,500 years ago was Pisces the fish. Well, that's in the days of Daniel then. About the time when I project that Daniel changed the lettering style. That was back when the two tribes of Israel got smashed by Assyria and Babylon and sent into the captivity. Well, if that was 500 BC, 2,500 years ago, then 2,500 years before that would have been about 3,000 BC. Well, that was Noah's flood. Well, then that would have been backwards. That would have been in here, right? So here's Noah's flood. About 3,000 BC. Are you following me? You understand that calculation? If this was the time, if this was the constellation on the horizon in the days of Noah, 2,500 years later, it would be this one. And then 2,500 years later, it's that one. And 2,500 years later, it's that one. But what, that means out of all possible 12, and there's only 6,000 to 7,000 years of human population according to the biblical genealogical record, why did Yahweh just choose these, and what is the meaning of all the other pictures? Nobody knows. It's all speculation. So this becomes a game. But what I'm saying is, we had a conversation earlier, a few of us. Step back from religion for a moment. Step back from science. We're just people on the face of the earth. Here we are. There's educators, there's voices, there's scientists and preachers and professors, all making stuff up, all going blah, blah, whatever. Is there any reckoning of truth? I can choose to believe it's true. I can invent some myth. But did the Creator of the heavens and the earth give humanity any tool, a device, like a watch that could tell you the time, like a plumb line to tell you perfectly level, or plumb water finds its own level, tape measure tells you a distance? Did He give us something to determine truth? Put the sun in the sky so we could see what hour we're casting the shadow. The moon, with phases, can register days of the month. But did He give us anything to determine truth? What? What did He give us?
Well, the calendar, the yearly calendar.
It's all invented. Nobody has a yearly calendar, other than the two solstices and equinoxes.
But you can only see these constellations at certain times of the year as well.
Okay, but here's the thing. What does that have to do with truth? Once the pictures are there and the calendars are there, what about truth? When I say truth, I'm talking about ideologically. Concepts, ideas. Cut to the chase, I believe that He gave us this alphabet. Now that's to say this is of divine origin, not a human invention. And if you don't know what it means, it's like somebody having a tape measure and I don't know what it... So for example, what comes to mind, Gene Scott giving us an analysis of the Great Pyramid in Giza in Egypt. There's this thing on the wall. It was, I never saw it, but I think what it was something like this. There's this plaque, and I think it had like these two dots or something like that. What's that supposed to mean? Nobody knows, it's just a piece of decoration. But what Gene Scott was saying is the distance between these 2 points is what they call the cubit length. So this would be called a pyramid cubit. A measurement device. Maybe a pyramid inch, whatever, how close they were. But the idea is to say something has to establish an accurate... word comes to mind, chronometer. That's something that establishes this distance, this timing, this pacing, this rhythm. So for me to say this alphabet was given to humanity from the Creator of the heavens and the earth, then any ideas we have we can put back on it. And you could say, well, every witness testimony, Ed, has to have 2 or 3 witnesses according to the Torah to be valid. If a guy has prosecuting a case in court, you need 2, at least 2, if not 3, witnesses. Okay, if I'm claiming this is the voice, where's the other voice? Well, Yeshua, he talked, he spoke in Hebrew. You got the Mishkan pattern, you've got the days of creation, you've got the Moedim, you've got the Beatitudes, and I've literally found over 500 scriptures in between Genesis and Revelation that can be figured to fit this pattern. Daniel 9:24 is one of them that's real clear if you know what the letters mean, but that's a whole other story. But what I'm saying is, suddenly, though we thought they were pagan, idolatrous, heathen, perhaps Babylonian or Egyptian or Persian, these constellations, according to the Rolliston, are the other voice. And when I say according to Rolliston, because he makes it pretty clear in this verse, the correlation of these 12 pictures to the 12 tribes. But is he right? Nobody knows. He's presenting it as if he's right. I'm not saying that he is, but I'm just holding this up to say, let's look at it for the consideration of comparing these pictures to the 12 tribes to the alphabet. Now, so this is a step into the realm that no man has gone before, you know, the Star Trek thing. And so you don't have to believe this. Sounds like we might have the noise coming up. We're at the edge of a hurricane here. But, so literally, what do we do with this? Where do you start? Well, if this starts in the spring, Rolleston here then always tabulates the registry according to starting with Aries. Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricornus, Aquarius, and Pisces. Just for the verbal record. So Yahweh told his people, this month, the month of Aviv, in the springtime will be the beginning of the year for you. Aries. But it might slip depending on which era of 1,000 years you're in. However, do you know why the Jews call this month Rosh Hashanah? Does anybody not know what that means? Everybody knows? You don't know what it means. Okay, Rosh means head, and Shana means change. Head of the change, well, to vary or change, to have a different, but it also means year, because every year changes then at this place. So if you start here, and you go up here, and then you turn around, and you come back down to here, this point right here is the place of change. So if you start here in the beginning of the year, in the springtime, and you come up 6 months to September, October, and then you come back 6 months to the springtime, that makes this the fall equinox if this is the spring equinox. But why do they say this is the beginning of the year? Shana Tova, hey, Happy New Year, Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the year, because head means beginning. But in Hebrew, the word Rosh, or head, which is this word here, also means the foundation or the basis. Well, that's the beginning. Is it the head or is it the beginning? In Hebrew, it's both, and so that sets up the confusion. So for the Jews to say, well, we're going to consider the autumn equinox, the beginning of the year, that's what's called the fiscal new year, which is to say for cultural purposes, political purposes, accounting purposes, that you ceremoniously, but Yahweh said, the spring is the beginning of the year. I'm just showing you where it sets up the confusion and the problems. So here's the thing. For Rolleston to say, okay, I'm going to start with Aries, and that's the pattern. It's like, other books I've looked at, maybe even Bullinger, I can't, that was years ago, so I can't really tell you for sure. But somebody said, you know the Sphinx in Egypt? It's the back end of a lion with this, you know, the crouching paws here, and then the head of a woman. It's like, well, wait a minute, the head is really out of proportion to the body. Why is that? Supposedly, they think, in the past you had this big head before that was in proportion, and then each pharaoh didn't want any record of anybody else. Kind of like Antifa knocking over all the statues of our heroes from yore. So they kept carving away at the head until now it's this little tiny head of the last pharaoh who did that. And then Napoleon got there and blew the nose off with a cannon. And it's like, you know, everybody defaces the other guy's heroes. But it used to be, they say, the head of a, you know, just here, the head of a woman. Well, why would you have the head of a woman on the body of a lion? What kind of ceremonial object is that? Nobody knew. It was all conjecture. Somebody went to a place called Dendera in Egypt, Dendarah, Dendera, Egypt, and they were digging around, Rolleston talks about it here, and they found a planetarium. They found a place that inside had this dome, and on the dome, it was all obliterated for centuries, but they cleaned it up and said, whoa, hey, here's the constellations, ancient Egyptian constellations. They were pretty much exactly the same, a few little variations, but somehow in that was a picture of the head of the woman and the body of the lion. So you go, oh, wait a minute. The Sphinx is a monumental record that there's a break between, it begins with the Virgo virgin and ends with Leo the lion. In Hebrew, the word lion is Ariel, and Virgo, the virgin, is Betula. So these are just the two Hebrew words. It begins with Virgo and ends with Leo, but that doesn't have the springtime being the beginning. That actually goes down to this time of the year. Libra is the birth sign for being born at the beginning of October. That's Sukkot. So that's 6 months later. So 6 months away from here is somewhere in here, even though this looks like they're different. I'm just showing you that's the way it lines up. So here's the thing. If you take the Sphinx as a record, head of the woman, body of the lion, then that's where the counting order of the constellations start. Rolleston doesn't address that. When I say the counting order, what Rolleston did is that he said, okay, let's just plug Aries with Reuben. Okay, well then, is it the birth order? Who was born after Reuben? Remember Jacob's 12 sons. Simeon, then Levi, then Judah. But wait a minute. Leo the lion lines up with Judah. If that was Reuben, then it doesn't exactly fit. So then Rolleston and E.W. Bullinger take the Mishkan and they place it and they say, okay, the Bible tells us very specifically, I think it's the book of Numbers, that the Israelite tribes, the 12 tribes, camped around in a certain order. You've got the 4 primary tribes, like each of the 4 sides, and there's 3 other ones with them. Just for the sake, there's a total of 48 constellations of regard. Then there's a bunch of other added ones more recently. You got 12 primary, and each of the 12 has 3 what they call deacons. You know, like the deacon in the church, somebody who helps and assists. Same word, diakonos in Greek. Like a hostess, like a waitress, like a nurse, somebody who facilitates. So these 3 deacons per 12, so that's a total of 48. So there's 48 stars. That's where the Big and Little Dipper and a few other things like Pegasus and the Southern Cross and all those guys come in. The deacon constellations, which Rolleston and E.W. Bullinger talk about. Gospel in the Stars. Stars is, I think, Bullinger's book. Anyway, so what Bullinger says is, if you say Leo, the lion, well, that's Judah, because there's a phrase that the lion of the tribe of Judah. Then other people say, well, Yeshua is the lion of the tribe of Judah. Whoa, the lion of the tribe of Judah. Okay, the lion equals Judah. There, we got it. The lion equals Judah. It's like, maybe not. What do I mean, maybe not? Now I'm bucking the system that everybody agrees on? It's all speculation. Why would Leo automatically represent Judah? Because he's a lion. Wait a minute. The other thing that Rolleston brings out in this book that most people never heard of, but E.W. Bullinger does talk about, and another guy named, I think it's Sears, and then a bunch of other people, is that the reason for these constellations and their deacons and the names of the stars that compose them points to the story of Jesus being the Messiah. Every one of these constellations tells something about the story of Jesus fighting against the devil, based on the prophecy in the Garden of Eden where Elohim says that the seed of the woman would get bitten on the heel but crush the head of the serpent. And that picture theme is in every one of these constellations, but not in the Latin, not in the Greek, not in the superheroes of Hercules and Orion. You won't see it. But if you look at the Hebrew meanings of the stars, and you look at the pictures that these guys were described, every one of them are a picture of the story of Jesus fighting the devil, getting wounded, dying, resurrecting, killing the devil as a serpent figure, and rescuing the church. And it's in every one of the constellations and deacons, and the names of the stars validated. That's the premise of Rolleston's book and E.W. Bullinger's book. I'm not in disagreement. I'm not saying that's wrong. They analyze it very well. So that's saying, forget these names. You look at the pictures, and it's the story proving. Now, so we were talking a minute ago, why would Abraham tell a story where his people get great and then get compromised and captured, but then they get great again? Because that's the same story what happened to Jesus, Yeshua, as a fractal model. He comes from heaven to earth, does all these great miracles. They hail him as the King of Kings, Palm Sunday, and the next thing you know, they crucify him and he's in the grave dead. Well, gee, that went well, didn't it? Poof, he pops out of the grave, woohoo! flies off into heaven, and he says he's coming back to reward those who believe in him. Same story. Why would he do that? Because that's what we do. So that's a fractal pattern, a model of the story of Israel. Israel, sons of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Joseph is taken. Joseph is put into prison, sold as a slave, goes to Egypt, goes to the dungeon, comes out to be the vizier, the prime minister, second only to Pharaoh, and then he gathers up all the wealth, and then he gives it to his family when they come in, and then his people basically turn away from the culture of Yahuwah, become Egyptianized, they become slaves, and then Moshe is born to rescue and redeem them. They come into the land, Saudi Arabia, Jabal al-Laz, Mount Sinai. They get the 10 Commandments, they get the covenant. Then they go stupid and they lose everything, but then they come back in the days of David, they're preeminent. And then they lose everything again. Yeshua comes, and then they lose everything again. Everything goes dark, Middle Ages, and here we are. What I'm suggesting, we're at the place of the possible resurgence of back to this preeminence that was always prophesied. And is that the last thing? Well, it keys into the statue of Nebuchadnezzar's dream of Daniel chapter 2. Same story, the rock hits the feet. I think that's what this event is here that we're studying. But I'm trying to show you these parallel themes of different stories that if they all overlap, the story of Yeshua, written in the alphabet, written in the history of Israel, written in these constellations, is all the same story. So they can be double-checked, the second and third voice of witnesses. So part of the study, which we don't have time to get into, is overlapping these things as overlays, as themes, and finding that they all match. Finding a place of 3 or 4 things lining up, these things lining up, and that these guys are saying it's all about Jesus and Satan wrestling and contending over the church. But I don't necessarily think that's the whole story or an accurate story, because it's not about the church. I think it's about Israel, that Yahweh calls Betula Zion, the virgin daughter of Zion. Betula Jerusalem, Betula Israel. So it's all a matter of Israel, who went stupid and got divorced in Jeremiah 3 and 4. Ephraim waking up, there we talked about Jeremiah 33, and Yahweh saying, hey, make road markers for yourself, come on back, the prodigal son story, coming back and whoop, everything blossoming like the blossoming of the Zodi out of the pay. Pictured by this language, which is right now. I'm trying to bring all these prophecies present tense and say, what does that got to do with this? It all depends then on the value you assign to these pictures. If we leave them as the pictures of astrology, it'll throw us off. That's why if you look at the Paleo-Hebrew and you don't look at the modern Hebrew, you don't look at the English letters, your brain will have a clean slate to see it. If you keep these words, it looks like astrology, it looks like this Latin, Greek, the superheroes, it'll confuse you. So the thing to do is, whether it's this book or you look in the scriptures, he says, Ralston was saying, when Jacob was giving the prophecy, as in Genesis 49 that we'll look at in a minute, he made allusion or reference to each one of these symbols. But if you're not looking for it, you can't see it. Rawlinson's looking for it and sees it clearly. And then Moshe, he's standing on the hill overlooking the tribes, seeing the 12 banners, and he gives this prophecy, but if you don't know he's looking at the banners of the astrological zodiac symbols, you can't see that that's what Moshe was talking about. And he says it's very clear. I've never heard of that before in my life. So how clear is it? Only if you're looking at it. But what he doesn't do is say, it's all about Israel, it's not about the church. It's all about Israel, which is the same parallel story as the Messiah. He leaves it at proving that Jesus is the Christ wrestling with Satan, but that's not the story of Israel. I mean, it doesn't deny it, but what's the story of Israel? It goes back to Deuteronomy 30. It says, when all these things have come upon you, the blessing and the curse, that I tell you about today, then you will come back to these words that I'm commanding you today, not the New Testament, coming back to these words of Deuteronomy 30, words that Moshe spoke right near the end of his life at his death. And he says, then you will turn back to Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart and all your soul, at which time Yahweh will then restore to you all the promises, the blessings of the kingdom, and you'll surmount to the highest order of all your potential that your ancestors turned away from. I'm paraphrasing what he said, but look at Deuteronomy 30, because if that's where we are today, coming back to all these words with all your heart, like this flourishing, this spectacular blossom, then that's what's in front of us. And if we had I did a video last week, Prisoners of Hope, The word prisoner there is one who volitionally returns to Yahweh's Torah and so be harnessed or shackled or bridled to conform your life according to his instructions of righteousness. And then that word of hope is to say, by doing so, we know that therein is the victory, the promise of all his blessings, and that hope is what sustains us to say, I'm going to do what he said, hoping, trusting, believing that what he said is true, because it fits the calibration of this message, and then this whole other voice of this message, and the other voice of Yeshua written in the New Testament. There's a third voice, and just the functional order of cause and effect, which is, you might say, esoteric physics on the face of the earth. There's another voice. Okay, then let's do what he said. Let's sit down on Shabbat and quit working. Let's keep the Moedim. Let's learn his language, his name, and project all of our energies towards the great future that his words clearly promise, that nobody has talked about for all these years. That's the upshot of this whole thing. So then what do we do with these pictures? You have to almost forget these pictures as images or as the nouns. And what Rolliston does is the Hebraic thinking is to go back to the action. Okay, what's the action of the ram? The ram is a picture of a sacrificed ram sitting there with his foot on the head of, I think it was a snake, as if to say, I conquered you, but I'm wounded unto death. Well, that's the picture of the crucifixion. Horus the bull, charging out. Well, if we start with there, is that to say we start with the crucifixion? But what if we started with Virgo the woman? Well, if Yeshua the Messiah is birthed to the planet, so here you have, going back to the Aleph, coming from the infinite beyond, Aleph, the silent letter, Elohim, into the cosmos, Bet, Gimel, voyaging through the, you might say, through the birth canal of the woman to be revealed as a man who would then be distinctive yet put to the weapon, crown of thorns, and yet also put to the crucifix, entombed. Well, here's a picture of Yeshua coming in. But how did he come in? Through the woman's pelvic door, Dalet, triangle. And it's like, well, wait a minute. If Yeshua comes in through the Virgo, what tribe was that? Maybe that's Judah. He came in as the king of the Jews. He came into the culture of the Jews, the southern kingdom, as the king of the Jews, speaking their language according to their Torah, in their temple. Well then, how come he's Leo the Lion? He's all of them. But if you're going to appropriate which tribe is which emblem, and this is where Bob Wadsworth came up with something really interesting there. He did this whole study of the constellations. He was a guy in Oregon. I don't know if he's still around. But also, he did more study on the constellations than anybody I know, other than E.W. Bullinger and Francis Rolliston. But what Bob Wadsworth noticed is that the two fish are actually chained. The back tail fin has a chain, or a shackle, which is chained, and the two are connected. But one fish is going this direction, and the other one that direction. And what he noticed is, hey, wait a minute. If you look at a map of the Middle East, and say the source of the joint chain is Jerusalem, Israel, the top fish goes into captivity in Assyria, and the bottom fish into Babylon. And that's a perfect map of where they went into dispersion. It's like, wait a minute, is this the two sides of the kingdom, Ephraim and Judah, going into captivity? Well, then that shouldn't be the end of the story. But if we start here, that's the end of the story. So maybe we don't start here. So maybe Rolliston's wrong about that. What I'm trying to show you, there's the little things that new insight means that Bullinger isn't necessarily right, Rolliston's not necessarily right, Wadsworth, I'm not necessarily right, but I'm saying if we think that the signs of the Mazzaroth are just idolatrous astrology, sorcery, heathen images, throw it away, it's dangerous ground, don't even bother, then we miss whatever message Yahweh intended to be in here. And if he put the 12 tribes, remember there wasn't 12 tribes when Abraham was told to separate the stars. But if Abraham either himself studied the stars and came up with these 12 images, have you ever seen a painting or perhaps a song that your great-great-grandfather artistically made?
Yes.
Have you?
I have a picture.
Do you have a regard for it?
Yes.
Why?
It's history, it's a genetic blessing.
And it's your great-great-granddaddy,
Yeah.
right? So Abraham is our great-great-great-great-great-great-great-granddaddy, and if this is his artwork, we should have that same feeling that you have for that piece of your ancient family heritage that we would have towards these 12 constellations, but we don't, because it's been robbed from us. Like we don't have a regard for these 22 letters, even though they're Yahweh's personal handiwork, because it's been robbed from us. So to have our eyes open, Ayin Dalet Ayin Tav, to regard this, I'm suggesting that if Wollaston is correct, and Bullinger is correct, and Wadsworth is correct, but they've missed something about Israel and Judah being reunited as per Ezekiel 36 and 37, then this concept of coming back to the Torah, which if they're Christians they didn't have, coming back to the Torah, coming back to the Moedim, understanding that Yeshua is the Messiah, and then saying, well, where does that put us? Now, if we had more time, which we don't have, hopefully I'll get together with a guy next week and maybe elaborate a little bit more and make a video and you can watch that. But going through each one of these things, what they really mean. For example, Cancer the Crab. This is one constellation that me and John Dilday discussed on the phone for a couple hours, looking at all the names of the stars, analyzing the meaning of the words in Hebrew, what is the picture they come up with, and it's like, you know, this actually more looks like the Good Shepherd, El Roe Tov, because there's a picture of a crab with his pincers, and it means holding and grabbing in safety like armored crab. But none of the names of the stars are about a crab or a sea life. It's about a shepherd who's holding, and I think that's the constellation with the dippers, I think. Well, here's the shape of the dipper. Well, that's a bear. Well, here's the body of the bear, and here's the tail of the bear, and his head is somewhere out here. And bears don't have a long tail. What does that mean? Well, that's the ladle shape. But what it really is here's a sheepfold by these 4 stars. A sheep pen with a door. And remember, Yeshua is the Good Shepherd. But the sheep leave out. So the tail is actually a picture of the sheep walking away, but it's also a picture of the sheep coming back home. And then he's got 2 sheepfolds. He's got this one sheepfold with the sheep walking out, and then he's got this other sheepfold with the sheep walking out. And if you combine the 2 sheepfolds, and you have the one shepherd at the door, by golly, that looks like the letter Het. Which is why I actually draw the letter Het to look like that, because it's a picture of the 2 sheepfolds pinned together by the one shepherd. Other people draw the letter Het like that, or sometimes with 3 lines. But I always draw it like that when I was considering a number of years ago, this thing about the constellations. Well, if it's Cancer the Crab, where's the sheepfold? It's not Cancer the Crab. It's the Good Shepherd holding and protecting the sheep in his 2 different sheepfolds. Remember, Yeshua was talking to the Jews, which said, I've only come for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. That's the northern kingdom, the lost 10 tribes. It's not the southern kingdom with the 2 tribes. So there's all this other mysterious stuff that most people just don't know and maybe don't care about. But that's something having to do with this. And so perhaps this is a bad name. Well, one thing John Dilday found is not only have names gotten distorted, or like with Sagittarius, is it the horse, is it the rider, is it the arrow, the bow, or is it the function of the arrow? What Rolliston says is China thinks it's this. India thought it was that. Babylon thought it was that. Egypt was this. America that. It's like, which is it? The only way to know for sure is to correlate these constellations with the alphabet, with the names of the 12 tribes, and the promise of the restoration of Israel, which is then modeled by the life of Yeshua. Are the Christians going to do that study? Not if this is New Age woo-woo sorcery. Are the Jews going to do it? Not if it has to be modeled after Yeshua. Well, then who's going to do the study? Hey, let's us do it. That's why we're doing this. Okay, now, to jump ahead, in Genesis 49, Jacob, he's about to die. He comes in and he gives a prophecy about his 12 sons. And if you remember the story of Joseph, Jacob had 4 women. 2 wives, 2 of the handmaids of the wives, birthed to him 12 sons, but Joseph was the 11th the firstborn of Rachel. So as the firstborn of Rachel, who was his preferred bride, remember the Leah kind of took him over? Okay, so Reuben and Yehuda, or Judah, and Simeon and Levi, the first four born of Leah, and then you got the handmaids in there, and then, but anyway, so in a sense, Joseph was a firstborn, or the firstborn of the preferred wife, but not the firstborn of the husband, so it gets kind of confusing. So he gave us prophecy regarding Reuben, and Reuben did something really stupid, so Reuben got almost kind of a curse instead of a blessing. Moshe kind of corrected that a little bit when he gave the blessing, but nevertheless, all the other sons, the 11 other sons, get like a little 1 line or 2 lines. Judah got a little bit more, but all of a sudden we get 5 verses in the prophecy about Joseph. I'll read you what it says here. Genesis 49, verse 22 through 26. This is what the Stone's translation says is the prophecy regarding Joseph that Jacob gave him. A charming son is Joseph, a charming son to the eye. And he looked nice. Each of the daughters climbed heights to gaze. Girls thought he was such a handsome dude that they would climb walls just to get a view of him as he maybe walked past, or as he was about his job. They embittered him. Who's they? Well, that would be his brothers. Became antagonists. The arrow-tongued men hated him. Doesn't say who, but it must be he had some enemies. But his bow was firmly emplaced, and his arms were gilded from the hands of the mighty power of Jacob. From there he shepherded the stone of Israel. What's the stone of Israel? His brothers hated him. The girls thought he was pretty cute. Somehow Yahweh had made him strong unto war. What does that got to do with the prophecy? Verse 25. That was from the God of your father, and he will help you, and with Shaddai, and he will bless you, with the blessings of heaven from above. Oh, now we get some prophecy. El Shaddai is going to bless you with the blessings of heaven above, and the blessings of the deep crouching below. The deep crouching below? From the heavens above, the earth beneath. No, he didn't say from the earth beneath. From the deep crouching below, from the waters under. They don't crouch. A lion crouches. What crouches? What I'm trying to show you is that the English is just absolute confusion, even in the Jewish translation. Blessing of the bosom and womb. At least that's clear. The blessings of your father, that would be Jacob, surpass the blessings of my parents. Well, that's Jacob speaking, so that would be Isaac and Abraham. To the endless bounds of the world's hills. What? Lost. Let them be upon Joseph's head and upon the head of the exile from his brothers. Okay, that's comprehensible. Joseph, remember, was the preferred son, the firstborn of Rachel. He had 10 other brothers at the time. Joseph made him this coat of many colors, these vertical stripes, as they say, and he went checking on them, and they grabbed him, and they wanted to kill him. They threw him in a pit with snakes and scorpions. They didn't kill him. So they said, now what do we do? Let's pretend he's dead, sell him as a slave to the traders going to Egypt, and they dipped the jacket in some animal's blood, and they bring it back to Jacob. They say, is this the coat that you made for your son Joseph? And he says, ah! He must be dead. We couldn't find the body, but here's and they didn't have DNA testing to see if it was his blood or animal blood at the time. And so Jacob, for the rest of his life, until years later, when Joseph met him in Egypt, he thought his son was dead. His brothers had thrown him into exile. That's the end of the prophecy. What kind of prophecy is that? Okay, so I reworked it. I looked at every word for word, letter for letter, and this is what I came up with. Now, I'm not saying that I'm right and these guys are idiots, but I'm saying that's incomprehensible, and I tried to look at every word, every letter, and weave it into something that made sense. And some of these words are awkward because it's not English syntax. So I'm trying to be true to the word order as literally as possible. So here you go. Son, that's S-O-N, not S-U-N. So a son, different Joseph. Built different, as in uncivilized. The road not taken, an unpruned vine. Unmanaged, unappreciated, annulled, disparaged, offcast. Joseph. Now, just the word Joseph means he will accumulate. He's a veritable goblet. He's got an eye for excellence, raising the bar of aptitude. Lofty thoughts, deliberations of the highest order, honor, nobility, dignity, keyed to the calculations of the arrangement of the heavens. Now remember, if his great-granddaddy Abraham sifted the stars and gave them to Isaac, then to Jacob, and Joseph picked them up, and Joseph had the dream of all the stars of the heavens bowing to him, the 11 other ones, and he says, who the hell do you think you are, smart, alecky kid? And then the brothers hated him the more because of that dream that he had, because Joseph had a mind for these things. Postulating thesis. And I'm taking these words based on the meanings of I'm not just trying to be verbose of my own study. I'm trying to tell you exactly what these words, word for word, in that text read like, and this is what I came up with, just so you know. Postulating thesis. Alignment of the stars is built to tell the story of success, of triumph. Joseph, he has what it takes to consider outside the box, make the dim sparkle, and argue the point rationally and convincingly. That's verse 22. Verse 23. They grieved him bitterly, multiplied afflictions, and hated him with a grudge of animosity which could not be appeased. But he took it as if the arrows were from on high to give mastery over partitions. These are the partitions of the heavens. What are the constituent parts? Well, that's the same thing as mastery over the partitions of the constituent parts of the alphabet. Like a puzzle, like his brothers, the family of Yaakov. Verse 24. How can an arrow return to the bow that shot it? Now, here's almost like this philosophical puzzle. How can an arrow shot from a bow, how can the arrow return to the bow that shot it? It almost looks like it's saying, the golden bow of the Ivrit, the Hebrew alphabet, from which derives all other tongues, when an old man returns to the perpetual, ever-flowing tonic of spelling words. Exactly the stuff we've been talking about. Though incomprehensible, difficult, like chaff, kind of hardened, at the mouth of the sworn vow. Mouth of the sworn vow. That's the covenant of Yahweh with Israel, that we said, yes, we will on Mount Sinai, and multiplied it by 7 if we would break the vow. My scattered offspring, that's like Yahweh casting his descendants across the face of the earth because they rebelled against him, going back to the great curse, suddenly are fertilized, vitalized, having strange thoughts like, hey, why don't we keep Sukkot and Shabbat? Quite foreign to them. Yet sufficiently, immediately, I can speak. Articulate, literacy, flourishing as a gallant knight, a courageous hero, strong, mighty, valiant. Yaakov arises to his calling. Like the wake of a ship, follow the tracks, ponder the route, from there to here and back again. These are all embedded themes within the alphabet in every word of like hundreds of verses that I found. And it's right here in verse 24 of Yaakov talking to Jacob, which I read, which is absolutely incomprehensible. Ponder the route, from here to there and back again. What evil stone has petrified Israel? That phrase, the stone of Israel, can be read as, what evil stone, like Snow White eating the poison apple, the same kind of concept, has petrified Israel? What thoughts have paralyzed the Prince of Elohim? How was the rock of our salvation crushed into crumbles? Did Yahweh give Israel a stone by which to attack at the heel? That's just kind of a question looking at that. Verse 25. From out of the haze, it's no mystery. Eagerly, willingly consent. I am with you, and he will help you, surround you, and clothe you as a wife. That's the word ezer. like Ezer Kenegdo. And Aleph Tav is the provider of all benefits. Similar to the verse we were talking about the other day, our Aleph Tav is supremely beyond anything that those other guys have as an emblem, like the eye in the pyramid or the skull and crossbones. He will baruch you, blessings from heaven above. This is 26. Blessings, deep void, undercurrent, like a riptide. Reads differently if you look at the actual words. Blessings, fields and womb, which is to say maybe interior, exterior, demonic devastation or merciful compassion, devils and angels, natural circumstances or scholarly effort. And here, verse 6, and I could go through this a little bit, we're almost out of time, but different way to read this verse compared to what we had there. Blessings hazy, I am yours, with you. Amplify exponentially, increase that blessing by teaching, instructing as a parent would their children, the light testified by the letters of the Aleph Bet. And that's this phrase here, which I'll show you in a moment. Project from the heights. That's like this video going up on the internet. The hidden oath, the forgotten covenant with Israel, which is forever, universal, all the pleasures of life. Make it be appreciated like wine, the subtle nuances, the best part, the pinnacle, the foundation. Yosef as the coda, the added part, like the Sabbath day, the seventh millennium. The ultimate irony, astonishing, being eclipsed, flogged, beaten, his head bowed down by oppression, what his brothers did to him. His differentness is the encoded Nazir, the winepress, the very tool by which his brothers mangled life, the lost 10 tribes, is staged as in a marina, and in an arena, ordered sensibly as if everything was intentional. His meticulous, pedantic, looking at the detail, as the prince, as a monk, as the consecrated one. That's this phrase right here. And again, I'll read you what they say. Just to take that and compare it to a charming son is Joseph. Charming son to the eye. Each of the daughters climbed the heights to gaze. There's no, where did you come up with this stuff? Well, that would be more of a study to show you word for word, letter by letter, how I got that out of this. They embittered him, became antagonistic, blah, blah, blah. Blessings of their father surpassed the blessing of my parents. It's like, it doesn't even sound close. But here, what's the upshot of this? Why am I reading this? Here, look at this. Blessings hazy? Sure, we can sit there, that's the word hazy. But see, I am with you. This is the prefix letter that says I am. This is you. And the word bet yod means with me. For us to say, I'm with you, Yahweh, then he says, yeah, and I'm with you. But it's the word hazy. So it's hazy to see what it means to be with him, but that he has been with us through all these years. Baruch, Bet Resh Koth is the word for bless. Bet Resh is the word for, like haber is to pronounce and articulate. It's the root of the word berit, which is covenant, and it basically means pure, clean. So the Torah instructions clarified, showing how if we're with Yahweh and he with us, this word gabor is mighty man, hero, or warrior, but it also means to amplify, or if something's hazy, how do you clarify and bring it up to full scope of appreciation? This is the word to be yoked or connected to, linked with the blessings of parental instruction. We were never taught this stuff. We didn't get parental instruction. The Jews teach their children, but not about Yeshua. The Christians say, oh, it was all done away with, because that was the envelope of the curse, and it wasn't, the darn devil. I'm not blaming the church, I'm not blaming the devil, I'm not blaming my parents. What I'm saying is that was all held in a package for 2,730 years as the curse, because Israel, 3,000 years ago, refused to regard the teachings of Yahweh, and the history of the planet Earth has been sustained all these years until now. Remember, Joseph was the 11th son, but he was the firstborn of the preferred wife. And if that lines up with where we are now, about this water bearer being poured out, then just like poured out, the mouth in bloom, these words being poured out upon us to bring in words of life, words of hope, words of righteousness and restoration, then it's not the voice of the COVID, the tribulation, the beast, the Antichrist, the New World Order, the Illuminati ruling and taking over the world. Those are lies. Those are Goliath pounding his chest like King Kong and say, I'm going to eat you Israelites for dinner. And David said, your head's coming off in a couple minutes and we're going to eat your guys' food off of your table, which is what he told the Israelites when they went into the land of Canaan. And when Joshua and Caleb said, these guys are going to be bread for us. The word lechem, which is war, is also bread. We're going to eat those guys' lunch, even though they're giants and we're little grasshoppers. You got to believe the words of Yahweh. And the words that he put in the alphabet, lining up with the words as a way to read the constellations, is the same words of reading the prophecies of the 12 tribes, because the constellations must be key to the 12 tribes if that's what Abraham was told to Sephir and what Joseph had a vision of. So if Joseph is the 11th son, and he fitting this word here, parental instructions, this is the word ayin dalet, which is the word witness and testify. Until, ayin dalet, same word. And here's that word aleph av tav, which is the letters of the alphabet. This isn't part of it here. The witness in the letters of the alphabet corresponding, remember how we read about considering the stars? Right there in this verse, it's telling us about how Joseph had this connection, whether the letters of the alphabet were actually written or Moshe came up with that. They certainly knew how to speak. And so there was something about the words in Hebrew tied to the constellations that was prophesied in what Yaakov said regarding Joseph. And this word hills means to project or speak from on high, like from the internet going around the world. And this is the word olam, which means forever, but also the pleasures of mankind that Yahweh had promised that are unseen. So it's the hypothetical blessing of the restoration of the kingdom where the entire world gets blessed. And this is tav he yod nun. But the word yod nun means wine. Anything with he's and yods and vavs and maybe even the tav means the essence of its existence. The essence of the existence of the pleasure promised to all mankind, if we would just go back to the term of the covenant, is the pinnacle but also the foundation. And Joseph, his word means goblet. Remember, he had that goblet and he said, don't you know, by this I divine things, known as Zafnath Paneach, the seer of unseen. It was all in the Hebrew. He could see the unseen because he had regard to the Hebrew and the testimony that was in the stars. And that was what was imparted. Well, that and the gift that Yahweh had given him. But it means he will accumulate and gather up. And then this word kadkad is his head was, got 3 minutes, his head was pushed down and depressed by his brothers and shoved into the mud with the snakes, but they wouldn't bite him. So he then sold him to a slave where he was put down and humbled. But from there he was risen up. And this is basically saying, the very thing that made him different and unappreciated, like an unpruned vine and offcast, that distinctive difference is what has empowered and you might say built him into the one who would be the Nazir, the prince, unlike all the others of his brothers, the Ahi. And so you go, what this means is that Yahweh takes our very particular, unfortunate circumstances, and if we yield to Him and trust and believe in Him, He will take those circumstances and use it, as it were, a catapult to throw us into the preeminent, most powerful, significant blessing beyond anybody else who was of the existing elite, powerful status quo. Beyond that, to the scope of Nazir. And the crown of the head that was revealed when your head is pushed down is the one that they will come and place the crown on, because Yahweh has determined that it's through Joseph that will be the salvation of his brothers. And as the model type of him becoming a slave in the dungeon, rising up to be vizier and saving the whole world at that time because of the famine, that story's got to be built into these pictures. So that what I'll do with Carrie Alexander in a couple weeks is, next week, is go through this a little bit more. We'll put up a video so you can see part 2 of this talk, hopefully. But what I'm saying is, this is open to study and regard, because I think that Bullinger missed it, and Rolliston missed it. They got a lot of stuff that everybody else missed, the Greeks and the Romans, the Persians and the Egyptians and the Indians and the Babylonians. But in this alphabet and in this Mazzaroth is the proof, the promise, because it's the fractal pattern that when Yeshua was crucified as, he's the jerk, kill him! Just like Joseph, But through that death, he resurrected unto life to prove there is life after death, the firstborn of us who believe and follow him, so that no matter what subjection pushes us down, the promise is the flourishing of Pezadi unto Kufresh. That's the message. The great hope. We can't be conquered. So no matter how they pound their chest and threaten us, they got nothing. We just hope unto Yahweh. We're at the end of the page.